Sudan is well known at the moment because of all the fighting and killing, and the Air Force having to pick people up. But I'm going to go back a little bit to 2007. That's when I was in Sudan, and it was the run-up to the referendum, where they were going to decide whether or not the south of Sudan would be allowed to break away and be a separate country. The north didn't like the idea. Why? Because the south had all the oil, but the south never had access to the oil, and so the south was absolutely basic and primitive. There were no hotels, very few buildings that were classified as habitable, because it was nearly all shacks or things called tukals, which are round mud huts with a thatch. No real factories, no commerce, nothing in the south, but they had the oil. Now, when they came to this decision about they ought to have a referendum, they said to the south, okay, we'll give you autonomy, we'll split the amount of money that comes off the oil and see what happens. Okay. They did split it 50-50 until the Chinese revealed how much they'd actually taken out of the ground, and it was 25% more than the North had said. So again, the North showed its hand. It was just awful. Bashir, the president, decided that Christians would have no jobs, they would have no pensions, and no medical cover, because they were Christians. And he wanted them out. So a lot of them did move south, because the south was Christian. Now, I was asked to build 4 radio stations in the disputed zone, that's the border between the two, which is all right, until you realise that the south doesn't have anything. So I had to buy all the components, every single thing down to nuts and bolts, from Nairobi and get it shipped into Rumbek, which is our base. Well, I lived in a tent because there weren't any hotels. So they shipped it in by air, and it came into Rumbek Airport, which is a mud strip, nothing special. And then we had to get it across to the 4 radio stations. Well, the masts, they were long steel galvanised frames which were bolted together. So we managed to borrow a thing called a buffalo off the UN, and we shipped it to the 3 stations that had masts. Then we had another problem, getting the materials, because we couldn't afford to fly everything, so we managed to find a truck who was willing to drive from Rumbek to the 3 places. The stuff arrived, well, it was supposed to be done properly, but no, the packaging was smashed up, some of the kit was broken, and the company that shipped it had to send it all by air because they were forced into replacing everything. So that was the first setup. Now, we had to build these stations, so it meant recruiting staff to do it. These were not our radio stations, these belonged to the communities. So we provided the money to build them, the equipment, training the journalists, training the presenters, and training the maintenance people. And we didn't own the station, the community did. But before we built them, we ran into major problems with the president. The president had heard what we were up to and decided that he didn't want that. So he issued a statement that all expats who did not have the correct visa in their passport would be executed or life in prison. So, okay. So we left to Nairobi and eventually got ourselves the right bit of paper. And we went back. Now, I was out in the field doing this building, and nowhere had hotels. It was either a tent or a tukul, which is this round thing with the thatched roof. And mine was great. It had a bed and it had a desk, so I could work. No electricity, which is a bit of a problem. So I went in, the first night I was there, I got into the bed, and I got the mosquito net and carefully tucked it in all the way round, so I didn't get bitten, because I know what those mozzies are like. And so I was in there, having a nice kip, and then I woke up and thought, that's odd. There's sand in the bed. So, okay. Went back to sleep, woke up, more sand in the bed, and it's ridiculous. Anyway, I eventually went to sleep and didn't wake up. When I got up in the morning, I went to see the cat manager and said, you know, like, what's with all this sand in the bed? He said, they didn't tell you. You're really supposed to put a towel or a blanket on top of the net. If you don't, your bed will fill up with termite shit.
Oh.
So he used to drop straight through the net, mozzie net, you know, which is not nice. So, they're crazy. But they did it. In the end, they got this referendum through, and 95% of the people voted to leave, which they did. And that was great, except that the President, De Silva, was a Dinka tribe. His vice was a Nuer tribe, and they didn't like each other. And so within 2 years, war started in the south. And the Dinkas were fighting the Nuer. In the north, meantime, the President Bashir had a big problem with the people, because his idea was to basically subjugate them. And there were all these fights going on, and eventually the army got rid of Bashir, told him to go, and he did. And then the army had a problem because one general was in charge, the other general thought he should be in charge, and so the two generals went head to head and started shelling, bombing, killing anybody who got in his way, each of them. And we ended up with us, of course, having to send our Air Force in to collect people who were trapped. Now, I have every sympathy with them, because you say, well, what the hell are they doing there? I was in the same boat in Liberia. I was in Liberia, I should have got out, and I didn't, and I had to be rescued by the French Special Services, because I didn't get out. So, Sudan is not a place to go. I would never, ever go back to work in Sudan. I really can't cope with a situation where people, 1 minute they're being friends and drinking, the next they're chopping your head off. So it really is not a nice place to be.